Louis dancing across the stage. Oh, I want that one. You want that one? Okay, good. Hello, it's lovely to be here. Very exciting to kick off the Conduit's year of events. My name is Jon Alexander, as you have heard. I am the author of the book which has sold least copies this evening so far, which makes me feel terribly depressed. No, I'm the author of a book called Citizens and a member of the Conduit. And what this event is part of this evening is a strand called How to Save Democracy, which is also the name of a podcast that I co-host with a woman called Omazine Khalifa, who was an activist in the Arab Spring and then became a politician in Tunisia. And between us, from a perspective of a kind of Westernish kind of how do we evolve the democracy we have, and Omazine looking at the failings of and the sort of slide back into autocracy in Tunisia and asking what could a brand new way of doing things look like. We come at these questions of what could this thing be, and I just wanted to give you a little flavour of the frame of that. The starting point for us is this idea that actually what we call consumer democracy, a democracy where people's only agency is to choose between a fixed set of options, where they're encouraged to make that choice on the basis of individual self-interest, where that's the assumed limit of what democracy is never going to be able to face the challenges of our time. And so what we're exploring really through is what we call citizen democracy. And if you know anything about me, you'll know I'm obsessed with that word. But the idea there is that citizen democracy is a democracy in which people's ideas and agency and resources are tapped into on an ongoing basis, where we're all part of contributing to our understanding of what the collective interest might be, not just aggregating our self-interest. And the series has been amazing and exciting and inspiring for me, let alone, and hopefully others. So we've had Brian Eno talking about the role of arts in democracy. We've had Audrey Tang, who was the Taiwanese minister who led Taiwan's crowdsourced COVID response. We had an event on crowdsourcing constitutions with the former chief creative officer of Mexico City. And I guess the spirit of this is all about refusing the kind of dominant moment of staring only into the chasm. And I think that's the core idea of this strand, is about that we do live in dark and dangerous times, but if all we do is stare into the chasm and pay no attention to the people trying to build bridges across it, then we will fall into it. And this phrase, what we pay attention to grows, is a big part of the philosophy of what we're trying to do with this. So this evening, we are turning our attention to what it means to give nature a voice, and how that might be part of the future of democracy in organisations and in our politics. We could probably, I tossed up whether to call the event Invisible Stakeholders, because we're also going to be talking about Future Generations Commission in Wales. I thought that was a very cool name, but one that people might not quite have understood in the same way. So we started out with Nature's Voice, we're going to expand that. I will introduce my two guests to you in just a moment. But before we start, a key thing for this strand and for the Conduit more broadly is to give you a chance to get to know one another. So I'm going to ask you, before we kick off, just to turn to someone you don't know, someone you didn't come with, and say a quick hello and what brought you to the event and why you managed to make it despite the miserable evening that we have. And when you're done with that, we'll get into the conversation. Go. If you can see me, raise your hand and close your mouth. If you can see me, raise your hand and close your mouth. If you can see me, raise your hand and close your mouth. My first gift to you, my friends, in participatory democracy, that is a great way to shut up a room. We will give you a chance to get back into those conversations in a bit and share your ideas and reflections and chip into the space. But I want to get into talking to these two. And so to start by introducing, on my far left, Simeon Rose, brand director and member of the executive team at Faith in Nature. And the husband of the source of the idea of putting nature on the board of organisations. Mm-hmm. And just to my left here, Jane Davidson, formerly Minister of Environment, Sustainability and Housing, have I got that right? There you go. In Wales, and arguably the driving force behind the pioneering Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the creation of not only the Future Generations Commission, but a bit of a tweaking, as we'll hear, of what I find deeply fascinating, a tweaking of the role of the Auditor General in Wales. There's the most exciting tease you've ever had in your lives.
Excites me, John.
And it excites me. So Sims, like, you guys carry on. Where I want to start with this is to just come into the conversation, just like land in the room what these two structures that we're talking about this evening are, the Future Generations Commission, the Wellbeing Act, and Nature on the Board. So Stim, if you could just like give us the kind of the very headline, and then we'll dig into it a bit more. What do we even mean?
Okay, so Nature on the Board it's not an organisation, it's not a body, it's just an idea. It's what started at Faith in Nature, and that was essentially a move to grant nature a voice and a vote in all the business decisions that we make. So what that means in practice is that we have a director or a number of guardians. Nature is the named director, but guardians speak on nature's behalf and input both from their own expertise and from a much wider pool of expertise as necessary, bringing nature's perspective to whatever issues that we're dealing with.
So really, really concretely, tangibly, in your board meetings, there is someone speaking for nature.
There are two people speaking for nature.
There are two people speaking.
Yes.
There we go. Let's just like make that a bit clearer. Maybe contrast it with a couple of other ways of, I guess, representing or aiming to do better by nature in corporate world. Yeah. Targets. And then there are sort of ownership structures. There was big news around Patagonia a little while ago. Do you want to just like position it a little bit more in relief of those?
Sure. I think actually looking at the Patagonia example is really interesting, not least because had it not been for a quirk of news cycles, the story that Patagonia had made Mother Earth their only shareholder and that we'd made nature a director would have landed on exactly the same day, despite being developed in silos with no understanding that the other was doing what they were doing. And they're both efforts, obviously, to go about business in a different way, taking the natural world / the planet into account. But they look at the problem through different ends of the telescope. So whereas Patagonia give their profits to Mother Earth or to the Holdfast collective that then distributes them to offset their impact, what we aim to do, and also let's not kid ourselves, the huge difference in size between Faith in Nature and Patagonia. If we gave all our profits to solving climate change, it wouldn't make a dent. But if lots of companies our size employed something like Nature on the Board, that might be something quite powerful, because what that does is it shifts us from a ask forgiveness at the end model to ask permission at the start model. That's what we aim for. So we aim to bring in nature's perspective before we make the decisions, rather than go about business and then offset at the end.
It's interesting because to my mind, in a small letter rather than capital letter way, your approach is political rather than economic. I think it's like you're talking about where's the power and rather than where's the finance going.
Yeah, and it's about conversation and it's about decision making.
And what would you like? Let's talk a little bit just before we come to Jane and bring the Future Generations Commission into the room as well. The impact of this, like can you give a kind of a grand example of this has transformed Faith and Nature in this way?
That's what everybody wants to know, and it is absolutely felt. It really has. Every conversation now, it's so knotty and intertwined. Every conversation at some time involves nature's guardians, involves a conversation around nature, and has really aligned us behind a shared purpose. If you want a really tangible example of things that have changed, you can look at pretty much all of our products on shelf now, because they've gone through a whole redevelopment during the time of which nature has been a voting member. So that means that, you know, everything today has had some input. That's actually massive, and they're currently the only products, I think, on the shelf where that is true across the entire business. But that doesn't mean that we don't continue, and actually what we're continuing to do is continuing to plan for what comes next, and we're in a real moment of planning for however many years down the line. But the biggest change of all actually is something that, when it gets so ingrained, you can't separate it out. You can't say that's because of nature or that's not. Actually, by the time that things are coming to me, nature's guardians have already inputted on them. So I'm viewing them from actually what should be my specialism. Brand, does this say the right thing? Does it look the right way? Because I can trust already that nature's guardians have already inputted, and from that perspective, I can feel confident. And that's the biggest thing, actually. It allows us to move forward with confidence, knowing or feeling that we've taken nature's perspective into account, and that enables us to move forward better, faster, with more confidence.
There was something you said to me when you first described this idea to me. You said the end drives the beginning. So it's like, do you want to say a bit more about that phrase?
Well, this is nature on the board is a tool, right? It is only a tool. It's a tool and a structure that needs to be in place, but it's what it leads to, which is the goal here, right? So it's a means, and it's a means that I think needs to be widely adopted. But actually, when you bring all those perspectives into the room, and this is the same for, you know, the argument for diversity more generally, but we need that diverse perspective of what nature would say with regards to all the different things that we do. So what would it say about the things that we're working on right now that will be on the shelves in 5 years' time? That absolutely, that, you know, we know that it's coming down the line when it comes to the boardroom at the end, but that means that actually the people who are feeding into the conversation much earlier are already taking that into consideration. They're already taking it upon themselves to step into the role of nature guardians themselves.
I love that, and it sort of speaks to why it's hard to separate out a single thing, because it's not like the result of this is that you get to a board meeting and you go, we have this proposal that we've developed and we're going to do it because nature voted for it. It's right. Much more that by having that structural symbol in the organisation, you transform the whole conversation, the whole culture, everything that's going on.
That's
way
exactly
further
right.
upstream.
Yeah, and I think to start with, perhaps it was viewed as, I mean, it's implicit in the name, perhaps, nature on the board. It's seen as perhaps a top-down thing, but the intention was always that we should all feel a part of this. And actually, the quicker it moves from top-down to actually everybody feeding in, the better.
Great. Are we understanding nature on the board, my friends? I think we're understanding. Good. Very good. Let's turn.
Number 2.
There we go. Yes, exactly. Test number 2. Jane.
Yes.
The Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. The Future Generations Commission. What are we talking about here?
I think probably most people in this room will be concerned that often politicians end up making very short-term decisions, and they make them with poor information, and quite often as a result of those decisions, other decisions have to be made. And I think I was just very lucky, because I was one of the politicians who started in Wales in 1999 in a new government, a new parliament. And so we had a major opportunity to do things differently. And we decided from the beginning to put the Brundtland definition of sustainable development at the heart of everything we did. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising on the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And in short, I spent 10 years trying to do that, and essentially went, bugger it, I can't do it without a law. So it became let's make this into a law. So now, in Wales, still the only country in the world, there is a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act that delivers that definition. It demands that the government and all the public services of the Welsh Government in Wales, which includes all the local authorities, all the health boards, etc., all the arts and cultural organisations run by the government, now have to think about the effect of their decisions on the economy, environment, society and culture of Wales. They are required to think long term, to be preventative, to involve people about whom decisions are being made, to integrate outcomes and to collaborate with each other in how they do business, and to oversee this work. This is drum roll. There is the Auditor General.
I told you it was good.
Role has changed from auditing for value in terms of monetary value to auditing the value linked to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And then alongside that is an independent commissioner, currently a man called Derek Walker, who has the most wonderful responsibility as a critical friend to help all the organisations in Wales, 50 named organisations in Wales, including the Welsh Government, to deliver the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act effectively. So 7 goals linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, 5 ways of working, mandatory in the Act, 4 pillars underpinning it, including culture, alongside environment and society and economy, and that becomes a new values constitution for a country.
There you go. And can you, I mean, the Auditor General, I do, the reason I love it so much is it's actually the last event of this series. I hosted Indy Johar and Imi Kaur, who, if you haven't come across their work, you really must. Like, whether you don't listen to our event, but just go find them. But Indy has this lovely phrase. He talks about the boring revolution, and this idea that actually it's the nuts and bolts work that has to shift. And I think the Auditor General, I mean, all of these, I think, are kind of examples of that. I think Nature on the Boardroom's a bit cooler, but that is hugely significant work. Can you give an example, Jane, of I mean, Simeon's already kind of pointed out the flaw in the nature of the question, but can you give an example of the impact of this? Can you give people a sense of what this has made happen in Wales?
Yes, I mean, I think that often people will refer to a huge decision that was made by First Minister Mark Drakeford at the time, which was when the Future Generations Commissioner Sophie Howe commissioned a barrister's view on whether a route for a new motorway should go ahead, and the effect on an area of special scientific interest. And it was very finely balanced in terms of the planning officer's report, and the First Minister came down against it and supported nature. And as far as we're aware, that is still one of the most extraordinary decisions that's ever been taken in Britain. And that was directly linked to the Future Generations Act. And some of you will have heard that we've had a very controversial 20-mile-an-hour policy in Wales across the whole of the country in residential areas. It has saved many lives. I'm incredibly proud of the government for doing it. I have to say I've been out of politics since 2011, but I am really proud of the government for having done it and taken enormous flack over it as well. But I think that's another example of now when you do these things, when you're brave enough, then actually communities go, actually we prefer this. This is safer, we're getting less emissions, our kids are healthier, there's fewer of them dying. You know, this is a good thing. So we need to help governments be brave.
But I think you'd also say that the broader impact is cultural rather than these specific one-off things.
Yeah, I mean, going to Indy's point about a boring revolution, I suppose the reason I'm sitting in this chair and not many of the giants who could have been sitting in this chair, in the sense that this was always a collective effort in Wales, is having spent 10 years trying to sort of deliver it as a minister, both initially through education and then in my role as leading for sustainability. I realised that it has to be a big systems change. So the government wanted to, for example, audit it separately. But if it had been audited separately, it would have been subservient to ordinary audit. So I was insistent it had to be audited by the Auditor General, who then would have to change the method of audit. So that's the sort of boring revolution approach. It's the looking upstream for the decision making. I also knew that if the government wasn't answerable to the Future Generations Commissioner, then actually the Future Generations lead that the government needed to make would be compromised, because all the short-term stuff would continue to get in the way, because government has crises every single day of its life. I'm very sympathetic to that. But if you want there to be a values framework that drives decision making, you've got to make it easy for people to adopt the framework. So the Future Generations Act, by being a constitutional framework that also helps deliver on the SDGs, means that it's something actually the UN has supported. It is being translated into Japanese, it may be translated into other languages in the near future, and the UN General Assembly last year supported the idea that came from Wales, that independent commissioner who helps people do really, really good stuff from a position of strength and expertise is something that all countries should have.
I'm going to start on the... Are we understanding this now? Are we getting this? Okay, good. So invisible stakeholders, future generations...
We can't see you, by the way, so...
Okay. I'm just pretending everyone's nodding. It's great.
We'll take your word.
There we go. And we're also talking really about constitutional intervention, right? Like, so nature being on the board of a company is an intervention in that company's constitution. It shifts the rules of the game, not just the way it works. Did you want to come in on that, Sim? No, you're just waving your microphone at yourself. Lovely. I want to now shift us a little bit into the backstories of how these things came about, mainly because like if these things are going to spread, and damn, we need them to rapidly, and I know they are doing as well. But the way that this process happens, and I want to start here with Jane and then come to you, Simeon. Actually, start with the way that the future generations, because that sounds so far away from anything that, like, if a cynic would say, well, you're never going to get that to happen right now. Yeah. But actually it was an incredibly popular thing, right? And it was an incredibly popular process that got there. Can you just say a little word about that the Wales we want that led to this?
I mean, I think that all ideas come from small seeds. I think that's the really important thing, because people generally tell a story where they kind of like, we decided it here, and then we delivered. And life isn't like that. I mean, you've been working in Harvard, and the Harvard squiggle basically says you'll probably have more troughs than mountains in terms of the achievement. And I think it's really important to say that, because the smaller idea that started me off was when we started in 1999 in Wales, we had a duty to promote sustainable development in everything we did, i.e. that Brundtland definition. I was really excited by that, and it was only 6 years later that I found out the civil service knew from the very beginning that a duty to promote meant nothing. And therefore those of us as ministers who were promoting away as well as we could, we didn't have the civil service online because they didn't have to change anything.
There was no structural necessity.
There was a structural, deliberate misunderstanding, as it were. So promoting was written into all our speeches, but nobody had to change anything. And so when I found that out, I was determined to turn the duty to promote into the duty to deliver. But if we hadn't had a duty to promote, I'd never have started that journey. So these things are really important, people who take that first big step into the unknown, and then we spent 10 years trying to deliver on that. But the very exciting thing was that because we're a small country, 3 million people, 10 million sheep, we have a lot of opportunity for talking to each other. And there's lots and lots of small organisations in Wales that are very happy to input in the way they want to improve their country. And over the decade that we were working, we were getting an idea of what people wanted. They wanted to live in a sustainable country. They wanted anti-poverty work. They wanted to tackle health inequalities, all of these things. And in 2014, there was a big UN initiative called The World We Want that led to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, in 2015. And Wales had The Wales We Want. And the government, because I wasn't in it at the time, was really clever. It didn't have the consultation. It asked the organisation that was responsible for all those small voluntary organisations. It said, you go away and talk to the people of Wales about what they want, because you'll be trusted. It's not like the Irish Commission that I know is a much more real participatory democracy concept. But it was something that's very unusual for a government to say, we won't do the asking, because that will be the usual suspects. We'll ask people who really do talk to people the length and breadth of Wales every day of their lives. And thousands of people responded. And their words are in the Act. And that, I think, is so exciting. The words in the 7 goals of the Act, if you want to look it up afterwards, are the words of the people of Wales on the face of the Act. So this is an Act by the people, for the people, and for the people, by the people. And it makes it, therefore, unique on all the fronts. It's not government to the people, it's government and the people for current and future generations in Wales.
And I think that idea of a big national conversation, a real genuine kind of opening, holding the question with people, is something we've talked about a lot in various episodes of the podcast. The Taiwanese actually started, the Taiwanese COVID response began with the president saying, we don't know how to get through this, but we do know that we'll get through it best if we get everyone involved. And that sort of spirit, that holding of a question with people, I think was right at the heart of this story as well. It's really fascinating.
But giving away power, which I know is a critical part of this, giving power away from government in order to get more trust and better outcomes is at the heart of this. Exactly that.
And I think that I mean, we've had a few conversations about how you might bring in citizens' assemblies and so forth into sustaining the legitimacy of the commission. Simeon, to come to you, so your story is a little different, but like, where does the idea of nature on the board and your invisible stakeholder come from? Where does it begin?
Sure. Okay. So if you'd have spoken to me 10 years ago and told me that I'd be speaking about governance and corporate law.
Or me.
You talk about boring revolution, like I couldn't have imagined anything worse, because my background's in advertising. You mentioned my wife earlier on, and we're a creative team, right? So we've worked in advertising for the best part of 20 years.
I'm going to give a little very random fact, which is that Simeon and I actually used to work at the same ad agency together in 2006?
Ish, yeah. Yeah.
Not to date us both, but yeah, so very different journeys, but we stumbled onto one another just very recently. But yeah, advertising background.
Right, so creative background in advertising. Initially, Anne, my partner, and I were brought into Faith in Nature to help them rebrand. And we just looked at this amazing name and thought, well, what a gift. Like, we both have this incredible love of the natural world and our back, and we're being brought in to work on a brand called this. What can we do with that? And what does it really mean? And it actually started from a really boring start point. Before we got into anything else, we thought, well, let's just play with a bit of a thought experiment. What if we just take the whole organizational structure of the company and tweak it a bit, move everybody down a level, and put nature at the top instead? That to us says faith in nature. And that was the start point of a thought experiment. And that led into how we then approached design. We went, well, let's imagine then that nature's the creative director, not us. What do we look like? Let's imagine then that nature's the boss across all divisions. And actually those words, nature's the boss, we thought, they're so powerful. Let's write them as large as we can across the boardroom wall, and let's play with that. Until in and around 2021, we're becoming increasingly aware of the rights of nature movement and seeing what was possible, looking at environmental personhood and models elsewhere, such as the River Wanganui, and thinking, well, if it's possible to create those...
Do you want to say just a word more about that, just to land it in the room for those who don't know?
Sure. So that was the River Wanganui in New Zealand essentially being recognised as a legal person. And the model there is that guardians speak on behalf or give voice to the River Wanganui, and the guardians there are both from the Wanganui people and also from the Crown. Together, they voice in the interests of what is widely understood to be the river, so the ecosystem that is the entire river. And, you know, the rights of nature movement, I don't profess to be from this background at all. So, you know, and at the time I was certainly a layperson, but there are countries, certainly in Latin America, where the rights of nature are recognized at national level. And we were just looking at this thinking, well, that just feels so obviously what needs to happen nationally around the world, but we can't do anything about that. What can we do, and what is within our sphere of influence? I wonder if we can transplant a model like that into a corporate, and what would it mean if nature really was the boss, and is that possible? And at that point we got in touch with Lawyers for Nature here in the UK and Earth Law Centre in the US, and basically said to them, well, the first question was, can you make nature the CEO of our company? And they said, no. But we can do this. We can make nature a director of your company. And we sat with it it didn't take very long to realize that was way more powerful because it's so much more replicable. Had we done something as headline grabbing as, you know, faith in nature makes nature the CEO of the company, A, it sounds a bit gimmicky, but B, what is anyone else going to do with it ultimately? Whereas actually if we can create a framework and a model that gives power to nature still, but in a way that others can then replicate and just pick up and run with, then we're really playing with something, right? And at that moment we just realized that actually, going back to the boring revolution, the law is not boring necessarily, it's an incredible storytelling tool. And when we started to see it in through that lens, everything changed. Absolutely everything changed.
And you, like, so from there you have the idea, you start to kind of build, and then you actually have a full kind of constitutional document that says how this works, right? That's open source and available to anyone.
That's right. So once the lawyers really started working with it, we were like, okay, so what is the thing that we can then put out there publicly and say, if you want to do as we've done, just pick this up and run with it. So they developed that for us, but also what they did was they amended our objects, so they changed what the company exists for, and that is, you know, as all companies do, to work towards the success of the company, but also to work towards protecting the planet. And realizing that those two things weren't in conflict is the legal genius really of the lawyers working on this, because the guardians are able to speak in the best interests of the company and the planet, although they're explicitly put there to speak only for nature, because obviously no planet, no business. So they're not in conflict even when they put forward a solely nature-first view. So yeah, they created the legal framework, they created the guardianship model, and we implemented it in 2022 and made the whole thing public then.
Very good. Can you say a word more about the guardians? Like, who are these people? Are they some sort of mystical group that we're now cultivating, or like who does that role?
By design, they change. The guardians on the board are not the only people who we expect to know something about nature, but they have explicitly been put in that role to speak only on behalf of nature. They all have permission to seek perspective from wherever they need, so they're really in some ways, I say only, but they're really in some ways proxies or mouthpieces for whatever expertise they need to bring. But the people we happen to have are incredible in their own right. And it's interesting to see how over the course of time the need for a different type of guardian is necessary, perhaps. So to begin with, we started with lawyers, the lawyers who created the model, because it needed to be understood throughout the business, this new framework that we're working with. But then ultimately it was moving past earth law or nature law and actually bringing in the perspectives that we were missing in the first place. Actually really, our current guardian, Juliet Rose, is head of development Eden Projects. She's a plant scientist, she's a conservationist, she's a botanist. And for a company that is entirely reliant on plants. You know, we make natural products from plants. Having that sort of input is not only really obviously needed, you know, from both sides. It's reciprocal. So finding the guardians that can A, speak with real expertise and authority on behalf of the natural world, but can also help the business. That they're the guardians that we seek, and who knows what comes next. You know, I talk about it. I've never seen this book before tonight, but by the way,
the look on his little face when he picked up his first one.
First time I've seen it in print, but I speak about succession within it and ecological succession, and how one plant creates the frameworks and the conditions necessary for the next. And if we were lichen, let's say, in creating the model, i.e. breaking down the rocks to create the minerals and the nutrients necessary for plants to take hold, then the lawyers came next, moss, let's say. They create the conditions necessary for the next guardians, and they create the conditions for the next and the next and the next and the next. So it's an evolving piece.
Since we're on the book, which I'm going to hold up briefly and tell you I think there's like one copy left, everything sold before we even started, but it is a truly beautiful thing and very beautifully written. I'm going to say that while you look mildly uncomfortable. But a couple of my favourite elements, the dedication, surprise, surprise, for nature. I'm just going to read you very briefly the contents list, because it's probably my favourite contents list of any book I've ever read. Lichen, why this idea and why now. Moss, how nature on the board works. Gorse, guardianship and speaking for nature. Willow, nature on the board out in the wild. Heather, a cultural shift. And Bluebell, a future with nature at the table. I mean, he's good.
That's good. That's good.
And then I just want to share with you a couple of my favourite little bits, and I know that I share these favourites with Jane. Right at the end of the book, actually, and the whole thing is great, but I do love the ending. He says, as I approached writing the end of this book, I asked Anne, his wife, to walk with me again. How, I ask, can more people cause radical change? With the same clarity that led her to ask, what if nature really was the boss? She laid out her thinking in 3 steps. Number 1, do whatever necessary to cause the mind flip. Create a new lens for seeing the world. Number 2, dare to ask, why are we doing it this way? And why are we still doing it this way? Number 3, realize that we have the freedom to change it. So much is just make-believe. Love that. Then she paused, and with the directness of somebody raised in the Australian bush, added a 4th. Stop talking, get on and do it. Your life must be an interesting one, my friend. And then there's a lovely list that I will encourage everyone to turn to, and you set an exercise for people at the end. You just say, if nature really was the boss, come up with 60 of your own questions that it would raise. And he starts off with, if nature really was the boss, what would it say about land ownership? What legal structures could be created to protect land in perpetuity? Would you give up 1 square metre of your garden to achieve its aims? And on and on. And I just think that the way you answer this question as well, about where did it come from, how did it come about, speaks so powerfully and in such a complementary way to what Jane has said, because the sort of the top down, the power, this could only happen because it started with the Wales We Want conversation to create the demand and legitimacy. Mm-hmm. But without that power, you've just gone, what can we do with the agency we have where we are? Exactly. And I think that's such a powerful thing, and I applaud you hugely for it. And everyone needs to copy it. On which note, let's turn ourselves a little bit before we invite you folks into the conversation, just very briefly. I think actually let's just do a little word on where this is going so far. Mm-hmm. Who is this spreading? And I want to ask you the same question, because I know there is take-up. You said Wales is still the only country with this in law, but there are attempts, and I think just to seed you into your conversation, so be ready, you're going to turn to one another and talk a little bit more in a moment. Let's give a bit of a sense of the momentum that is already building around both of these ideas and structures. Sim, first.
Yeah, it is spreading, and it's really interesting to see the speed at which, in some ways, it feels to me like we launched it wasn't years ago, but it feels like a long time. And I speak to people who are only just becoming aware of the idea now, and they think, well, no, look at what you've done. You've actually taken it from idea to something that is being discussed in the public sector now in Wales. So although we never thought in those terms, it really has moved very quickly. Within about a year, a few others had adopted the model, tweaks of it, and actually that's the whole point of it being open source, right? Actually, you make it work for whatever organization you're in. The first organization to pick it up and run with it were actually a small volunteer group looking after a massive chunk of the Arizonan desert. They're called Friends of Cave Creek Canyon. And they got in touch and were like, we see the value in it, we love it, we want to do it. And one of the, and one of the members there is ex-Stanford and was able to just like tweak it and make it work for them. Okay, that's not exactly what we'd had in mind, but then beautiful to see it working there and it have a real tangible impact because they're dealing very directly with the natural world. Shortly followed by the second company to actually appoint nature to their board, and that's House of Hackney, who also appointed Future Generations to their board. So, that was a really lovely tweak and adjustment. And loved meeting them and the spirit with which they picked it up, because that's the whole point of us doing this, right? Like, we could have sat on our hands or waited for it to be perfect, and the whole point was actually just going, let's just get something out there that we feel can work, and together all perfect it over time, hopefully, or tweak it and evolve it. So they came on board. Other companies have followed. I think at last count, there are around 25 different organizations that have implemented versions of this. I think it's really exciting that the National Infrastructure Commission for Wales has made nature a commissioner. And they're really on one to get other public bodies in Wales to follow suit. They're doing what we tried to do. Like we're effectively trying to prove that putting something like this in place can work in the private sector. They're trying to do the same in the public sector. Future Everything are another Manchester-based organisation. They're an arts body. They're trying to prove that it can work there. And slowly but surely, or perhaps quite quickly, there are organisations picking this up and seeing that it's a bit of an open door for them. So what they've got nothing to lose. Let's get this happening. And I think for me, if there's one part of me wishes that it's gone even quicker, but there's one slight pushback I hear sometimes, which is that the likes of the Shells of this world, they're not going to do this, are they? And I just think, well, you're jumping straight to such an extreme. There are so many. There are so many open doors. There are so many organizations for whom this would be valuable and helpful and who can implement this immediately. Then what I would hope is that they all implement it and that we can all work together to improve this and then worry about what comes later, next.
And would you say any organisation can do this and could benefit from doing this? Or would you bracket that a bit?
Certainly, as I understand it, any business in the UK can do this, as we've done it. Other organisations are being creative and figuring out how it can work for them. Certainly, I feel that every organisation can do what they can to bring nature's voice into the room, and that is absolutely necessary, both for the natural world, which does have inalienable rights, but have so far been completely neglected by pretty much, the entire corporate world. They can benefit by recognizing those rights, but likewise those organizations can also benefit from hearing, as I said earlier, how nature can help them, plan. Like I talk about the example of Juliet Rose on our board, for example. She's a plant scientist. We make things out of plants. What happens in 5 years' time when those plants aren't available, or when we need to look for analogues of those plants that have the same benefits but are actually still available? Or what happens when, the questions are endless, and the questions are endless, but also so are the upsides to having that input now. That is, where businesses perhaps wonder whether or not this is real value for them. That is mitigating risk. That's what boards constantly are trying to do, is mitigate risk, and what that usually means is that they're not willing to, they're worried about, the bottom line. But you can't mitigate risk for 5 years' time, 10 years' time, unless you begin understanding your place in the natural world.
So you're actually starting to talk about something like resilience, not just...
Yeah, absolutely.
Fascinating. Thank you for that. Jane, I feel like you were sort of going, yes, any organisation can do this. So maybe the nature on... I'd love you to reflect on public sector and this idea of nature as a representative, and councils, governments, could this translate directly here?
No,
and then tell us a bit about where Future Generations is going.
Okay. I mean, I think that you'll notice that neither of us have mentioned the word climate tonight, and yet both of us care hugely about it. And I think it's what is the lens that will encourage people to do things, and it's about things they love. And on the one hand, you've got nature is we're all part of nature, so it is as big a vision in many ways as future generations, because if we care about current and future generations, then we care about there being a livable planet, etc. So I actually don't see any barrier to any organisation taking both approaches. That's what interested me about House of Hackney, doing both, having talked to us both. Yes, and so suddenly you could see that there could be all sorts of people. And one of the people, one of the groups who did it for me is like your Arizona, Southeast Arizona group, which was a group of 17-year-old girls in Maryland, got in touch with me to say that they have written a Future Generations Charter for their town. So you could apply both of these ideas because they're actually part of the same big idea, which is how do you find a lens that enables you to take your really hopeful look at the world and translate it into something that the people in your organisation, whether that's public or private, understand. And I think that is not going to be a short-term process. Lots of people will fail at this stuff. There are lots of people who have tried to put future generations on their board or into their mission statement, and then that hasn't survived the accountancy route or the audit route in traditional public sector or other organisations. But I think younger people are really getting into this, and we now have in Wales a lot of young people, and 30 young people are trained every year by the Future Generations Commissioner, and they do projects in their public sector organisations in Wales to show how they can deliver on the ambition of the Act, which includes nature. And they now, those young people are getting to senior appointments in our public bodies. Well, when they run the public bodies, we're going to see such a difference in terms of the way those bodies are run. We're seeing it now, and if you look at the Future Generations Commissioner's website, you'll see huge numbers of examples, cultural, societal, environmental and economic, all interfacing with each other, examples of what people are doing across Wales, and that helps others go down the route. But I don't see any limit to this. I just think that we've got to demonstrate that these things are an answer to what we do next. Yeah. And we're not asking the right questions. And what is brilliant about Simeon's book, among other things, is, as Jon said, he just asks all these questions. And you will find questions that you'd want to ask in that book. And then he leaves a space for you to ask 60 questions of your own. So you've got to do, and I think it's this, what creates the epiphany that creates the action? What do you care about enough in terms of taking action? We don't do it because of fear. We do it because of love, we do it because of hope, we do it because of things we value. So what can enable us to run our businesses, our public sector, our voluntary organisations, with that at the heart of what we do? And hopefully we've created manuals, both of us, for how you can do it.
There we go. On that note, I feel like I sort of have another question, but I'm going to wait because I feel like we should bring you guys into this now. So the way we're going to do this, if some of you have been to events that I host before, we're not going to do this as traditional Q&A, I'm afraid. Well, I'm not afraid. That's just what's happening. The way we're going to do it is I'm going to invite you back into your conversations from the beginning of the session. We're going to give you about 7 or 8 minutes just to reflect with one another. Think about what would you want to add to the conversation about these ideas and these ways of working, anything really, and or what would you want to ask to sort of deepen the conversation. And then the way we'll play it is I have my little stopwatch. We're going to set I'm going to set a 59-second time limit, and we will hear multiple voices, as many as we can. But I will set a limit on them, and then these guys are going to listen with their questions or contributions, and then we'll have a bit more time to come back and hear some reflections and thoughts from these folks. So you're going to have about 10 minutes in conversation, and then we'll bring you into this more broadly. Does that feel all right? Away you go. Let's see. Okay, if you can see me, raise your hands and close your mouth. If you can see me, raise your hand and close your mouth. Look, I only needed 2. Come on. Okay, folks, let's hear from some folk in the room. If you can raise your hand if you'd like to contribute. I'm going to start at the back of the room to give someone a chance. Can I see a hand? Okay, no, we'll come down to this lady first, if we may, Paula. Just wait for the mic. And as threatened, the 59-second timer is alive.
Hello, I'm Sarah Newman. I live next to a chalk river called the River Darrant. And I just have a question in terms of giving it a voice for nature, and we're considering doing that. I have all these people I work with who I respect enormously, but one wants to protect the invertebrates, the other wants to protect the plants, the other wants to protect the water. So my question is, how do I sort out which voice of nature I pay most attention to? I mean, it's not up to me, but you know, if nature's on the board, which perspective am I listening to first, or you know, giving weight to, or anyway, that's the challenge.
Nature voice, which nature's voice? Very good. If we pass across to this lady in the front, if we may.
Thank you. Justine Huxley from Kincentric Leadership. And my question would be for both of you, to what extent are you relating to nature as intelligent and sentient and capable of co-creation? Like, because in my experience, that extra dimension really brings things alive in a different way. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, you know, I love this process, obviously, that I'm also very involved in, of bringing nature into our democratic decision-making processes. But, you know, there's still an anthropocentrism in that. And it's like, how is it if we, you know, also take ourselves into the democratic decision-making processes of more than humans, and look at how we can learn from that, and also how can we participate in their systems rather than dragging them into our extremely dysfunctional systems.
Very good. And then we'll go just next to you, if you would.
Question for Ian Mole from Green Spirit. Question for Jane, please. I'm interested in Wales as very progressive and open to alternative ideas, and I've heard 2 reasons for that. One is its small size, and the other was the push towards devolution, giving it more autonomy. Are those the 2 reasons, or are there other reasons for Wales being so progressive? And if so, what can we learn for other areas like East Anglia or Cornwall or whatever to make them follow the same route?
Very good. And we should also recognise at this point that this is a very Welsh event, with Simeon also residing there. And
down the road.
When I suggested that I bring them together for this one, Simeon was like, well, I'll just pop over for breakfast. Okay. So let's go back a little in the room, just behind this gentleman.
Question more on the business side than the government side. If you had 30 seconds with a decision maker, very senior decision maker at the average big company in, say, the UK or even the US at the moment, and you had thought about it and you were giving your 30 seconds of this is why you should start thinking about doing this, for example, appointing a director, what would you say to them?
Very tight questions this evening. This is great, folks. Any more for any more? There's a hand just behind you to the right.
Hi there, I'm Charlotte from Nula. I was just wondering, in terms of nature on the board, it's kind of great and felt at the top, but how do you make it tangibly relevant for your team that are doing all sorts of different things across the business, and how do they really feel it in the culture?
Lovely. I think there was a hand right at the back behind you at the table there.
Thank you. Somewhat related to that, and it's for both of you. You mentioned it during your talk. You're doing this from a top-down perspective, and it has a really powerful impact in terms of influencing culture in your organization or in your country. However, I was just wondering that lens. Sorry, I forgot the lady's name. The lady was talking about the lens of the people, how they change their lens to actually see what this culture means, as opposed to the mainstream culture. How do you? So, what I'm trying to ask is that every top-down initiative has a kind of an external impact of reducing the agency of whoever is down, and that actually takes away some efficiency, I believe quite a lot of efficiency to...
I'm afraid my timer is going.
Sorry,
it's all right.
To bring about the change.
Yeah, there we go, well wrapped up, thank you. One more hand down here if we may, and then I'm going to come back to you folks then. I've got some notes, I can steer you a little bit, but you can also pick up where you like.
Hi, thank you very much. It's kind of a adversarial question a little bit, because I love this, I really do. But I guess I wonder, do you think that it will be mostly companies that future generations and nature think should exist that will adopt these positions, and actually most of the companies that nature quite honestly would say you shouldn't exist, future generations would say we'd rather you not? And I don't think you have to go to Shell to get to that level, right? Actually, quite a lot of things might move away from this. That might be a limit on this.
Yeah, let's get some challenge into that. Very good. So, we have questions around what nature are we talking about? How do you decide which to give voice? When you think into the sentience of nature, does that shift things even more? A very specific question about whales that you might both want to come in on. And I think maybe roping together this sort of what's the average big company pitch with the are there limits to this might be a really interesting place to go. And how do you weave it into the culture? So go wherever you like. I would love you to take on that big company pitch and the challenge at the end there as well, if I can steer you.
Sure. Okay. So I think a big part of speaking to a company and giving them 30 seconds to try to convince them of this is to ask to look at what's going on in the world. None of us are blind to that, and to say that obviously companies are a big part of what's currently happening. To date, every single decision that a business makes impacts the natural world, but the natural world has no say on any of those decisions. So it's an appeal in some ways to the heart, to say we must bring in that perspective. We must acknowledge nature as the stakeholder that it so clearly is. But I also really believe in proving by doing, which is why we just got on and did this, rather than make a big campaign out of it. And what we're trying to prove is that we can implement this model and be a successful company at the same time. So if we can do both those things, I see no reason or no legitimate reason that another company should say we shouldn't also implement that model.
Would you also say that the resilience argument that you started going into before is
there's a huge business. There's a huge business mitigation of risk argument for this too. You know, we see it internally so clearly. You know, we're at the very pointy end of the arrow if you consider the types of companies where this might be implemented, because everything we do involves plants, but every company at some point involves the natural world. So, you know, whether it's obvious to them or not, it's true for them. And, you know, the fact that
every company is actually dependent on nature.
100% at some point along their supply chain or their operations, even if they see themselves solely as working in the service economy, like 100%. At some point, something comes back to nature.
Yep. And if you don't give it voice, then you can't. Then you'll destroy the very thing you're standing on.
100%. You know, none of us will exist. Their businesses will not exist if they don't take into account the needs and wants of the natural world within which they operate and upon which they depend.
And okay, I'm going to point you to one more, which is the very first question. The sort of how do you decide which bit of nature to listen to? Have you thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think if you look at Ecuador's model, so Ecuador have this at national level. Their model essentially allows for whoever cares about a particular thing to bring that forward, right? So if someone is passionate about protecting an orchid, they should be the person to bring that, you know, to protect that orchid. or a tributary, or whatever it might be. And so what we tried to create is a model within Nature on the Border. We're not saying that our guardians are the people who have ultimate say. Their responsibility is actually to consider the needs of all aspects, but those decisions are kind of managed one at a time, One thing we consider, it's different with a river, but, if we're considering where we source X from, or what label we're using, or what substrate, or whatever, they will have different impacts in different areas of the world, on different ecosystems at different times, and to a degree we have to trust the expertise of the guardians to kind of know the right questions to ask in those environments. And actually, Juliet, for example, is she's a conservationist, is able to ask those questions, but there was also a question about how this spreads more widely through the organization and is not just top down. And she's head of development at Eden Project. Part of her role is bringing in the community and meeting them where they're at, actually making this accessible to everyone. That was a real key reason for bringing her in as opposed to a number of other guardians, because we need our community, our organization, i.e. our business, to feel like they own this, and they do own it, because they're the ones making the products. They're the ones actually having that impact. They're the ones who get to actually change things and feel it's theirs to play with and adapt and evolve, and that they're in positions of power, and they are.
So if I understand and bring back to the Darrant, in a way you're sort of saying that the structure is to give the River Darrant a voice in all decision making.
Yes.
And then whichever decision is coming up, that voice
exactly
can be tapped into, rather than going, the voice of the River Darrant is the voice of crustaceans.
Exactly.
Got you. Okay, Jane, I'm going to come to you and give you, I would love you to maybe pick off the question about the what makes Wales special, and you can quote Desmond Tutu if you like, because I like that quote. And then I'll point you somewhere else after that.
Yes, the Desmond Tutu quote, which is in my book, because I became quite friendly. I was brought up in Zimbabwe, and I became quite friendly with Desmond Tutu over the years. Is Wales may be a small country, but she sure kicks like a mule. I just thought it was brilliant. I do think there is something about size and authority that came together at the right time in Wales in terms of this particular decision. Size, because you've got to be small enough so that you've got the biggest possible reach in terms of taking something on, but you've got to have enough authority for it to be replicable. Quite often things that, and certainly a lot of work that Jon does with citizens, we see incredible work done in places that is actually hugely replicable, but nobody's getting it out of the place it's in. So there also has to be something about a voice, and that voice having enough authority to be listened to. So I think that's the sort of circle there. And I think it does play back to your question about how do you decide whether you're going to listen to which part of nature, which feels to me like a question that we look at through that lens now, which is that we look at through a siloed lens. So something might come up in a planning application that means that they look at this metre squared of land or 100 metres squared of land in those sorts of ways, which means they're not looking at nature, they're looking at a small set of units. And if you think that way, then actually how would you ever make the decision about which of those should lose out in any decision? But if you're thinking about it as part of a much bigger whole, which is how can we grow all aspects of nature, including us, in a much more positive way, then there may be other ways of dealing with issues that actually give better outcomes. And I think that therefore one of the things about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is it actually has a goal called resilient, which actually I always wanted. If I'd been a politician at the time, I would have called it nature. because it is actually directly about enhancing Wales's biodiversity in the round, and not about those individual decisions about who benefits on that. And I tend to think of all of this as something which is about our role in the world, i.e. in nature, not to nature, which is actually a critical mind frame, and the medical professions sort of sine qua non, which is do no harm. And I think fundamentally all of this is about doing no harm, and often in a small country you can actually persuade more people that your country's culture and values should be delivered in a way that reflects the culture and values of the country, and that will make it different. But that could also be a town or a county or a district. This can be done at any level.
Yeah. I'm going to invite you both to share a last couple of thoughts in just a moment, just to say that on these questions about how to do it from the outside and these sorts of things, I would love to point people to a couple of other episodes of the podcast. I hosted one on the Irish Citizens Assembly, which is, if you don't know about this, is basically how Ireland legalised access to abortion with a 66% majority at a referendum in 2018, 2 years after a certain other referendum, with all the same misinformation and so forth in play. And the story of that started with a little group of citizens and academics coming together to create something from outside of government and demonstrate how it could be done. And the episode with Audrey Tang, the Taiwanese digital minister, is all about, she posits at the very beginning of the conversation this idea of demonstration over protest, which I think Simeon has spoken to briefly, not arguing for something or demanding something so much as, and yes, doing those things as well, but not doing those so much as getting on and doing them. So with that in mind, I'm just going to invite you both, and maybe I'll put the context. Like people are going to go out into dark and rainy, miserable London. They're gonna look at a news app, and you know what they're going to see. Give them something to take away from this room. Give them a kind of a call to arms, a call to action, a thing. What can we do in our lives to take inspiration from this right now? And I'm going to ask you to go first, Jane.
Ooh. I was just looking at him waiting. Yeah, I think two reflections really from me. By profession, I suppose, I'm an educator. I trained as a teacher. I've taught and lectured and been a senior person in the university, etc. And that old phrase of Aristotle's about give me the child of 7 and I'll give you the man. I think this issue about how we expose early years, youngest people. And one of the things I was able to do as education minister is introduce, it's called a foundation phase as opposed to foundation stage in England. And my favourite headline ever is Minister Makes Children Play in the Rain. And it was because we built in outdoor learning into 3 to 7-year-old. And I just hold on to that thought, because all our children should be playing in the rain and they should be out there. And then my second reflection is that my mum is 96 and my granddaughter is 5. And if Stevie lives as long as my mum, between them they'll hold 200 years of experience. So you all have the same things in your own families. 200 years of experience. And so much can happen in that time, but we're not holding the idea that we hold the wisdom of 200 years. So I think if you think about the oldest person you love, irrespective of whether they're in your family, and the youngest person you love, and you want as good a life for the youngest person you love as that oldest person you love has had, because we are the luckiest generation, my generation, then actually I hope you'll go out and think everything we've talked about tonight is not just about businesses or public sector. It's about how we view our life. It's about what we do ourselves. It's about the decisions we make and why we make them and the values framework that drives what you do.
Beat that, Simeon.
The reason I finished this book just by asking 60 different questions that I wrote without thinking an awful lot about it, but just being really conscious that I wanted to write and ask 60 silly questions, was to make other people feel more comfortable asking seemingly silly questions, right? This started with a question. This started with a, well, why can't we do that? This thing is happening over there. Why can't we also do it? What would nature say? You know, what if nature really was the boss? What would nature say about this and that and the other? And it's just a book full of questions, but I don't know the questions. I don't know what I don't know. I don't know the positions that you're all in. I don't know what you get to influence. So I can only ask questions within the small room that we were in, which was a boardroom, and go, well, what can I change right here, right now? And actually, when we start changing that story, within the small micronation that is faith in nature, we have recognized the rights of nature. Nature on the board is really just an expression of that much bigger idea, which is the rights of nature, right? If we all decide amongst ourselves in this room that we're going to recognize the rights of nature in this building, then we've changed the story within this building. And you can do that within whatever organization you're in, or at least begin asking the right questions that move towards something like that at whatever stage you're at. So I would just encourage the asking of silly questions, which is the heart of the creative process as far as I'm concerned. You know, it all starts that some of the most amazing creative people I've ever worked with can sometimes feel so frustratingly stupid because they just keep asking questions, and it comes from curiosity. And it comes from that point that you picked up on of Anne saying, well, why is it like this? Why are we doing this? This is just insanity. So I would just encourage the continuing of asking of questions.
I have a beautiful image in my mind of your 96-year-old, your 5-year-old and you brainstorming silly questions together, which I think maybe is the amalgamation of those two things. Folks, we are out of time. I hope you have enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. There are, as Lily said at the beginning, there are a few copies of Simeon's book and a few copies of mine and Jane's books as well at the back. The bar, I think, is open for a little bit, and then the bar upstairs on the 3rd floor will be open for a bit longer if you want to continue the conversations that you started, the new friends that you've made. I would love, again, just to point you to the How to Save Democracy podcast and also to the next event in this series, which I don't think we've got live on the website yet, but which is probably my fault. Lily's nodding. But we'll be on the 16th of February with the Turkish writer Ece Temelkuran, who has a new book. She wrote a book called How to Lose a Country, which made her quite a star, and she's got a new one called Nation of Strangers, which is very beautiful. I've just had an opportunity to read. So please do join us for that conversation, and go and brainstorm silly questions with some old and young people, and join me finally in giving my dear friends a round of applause.